Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are doing an episode on how to do sexual shadow work. Now, for those of you that have been listening to me talk about this, or you're one of my clients, or you went to my erotic shadow training, you probably have a leg up on this, but I wanted to just double click a little bit on what does it mean to do sexual shadow work? Why is it important? And how to become your true sexual authentic self. First, let's just talk about the concept of the shadow in general in Jungian psychology. It's anything that we repress, disown, or deny about ourselves. It's mostly an unconscious process, and this is why we do shadow work to take some of these unconscious bits conscious so that we can live more authentically in our everyday lives. So, for example, someone had been conditioned their whole life by their family, by their peers, that humbleness was a very positive quality. In the shadow of humbleness is boastfulness. So this might have actually unconsciously been driving some of this person's behaviors around not wanting to appear too boastful. Therefore, maybe they're not able to showcase who they are very well. They don't show up with confidence. And this is all shadow work is. It's just to understand what's in your conditioning and what is unconsciously driving your behavior. This work is so important and powerful to do because when we can work on our conditioning and bring this stuff to the surface, we have more active choice on how we show up in the world. It activates true free will. Whereas if you're moving through the world as the little robot you were programmed as, generally this will be tough on you on a spiritual, psychological, and emotional level. I remember when I went through my awakening process, I had this realization that, oh my gosh, it's I'm a little AI robot. Things have just been feeding my algorithm and I've just been responding based on the information around me and I haven't been really making conscious choices. This is what awakening is. It is waking up to what is truly you versus your conditioning. And there's lots of ways to do shadow work. Like, for example, we can do shadow work by interrogating our triggers. What gets an emotional rise out of us? What makes us angry, upset, or generally just emotional? And also, I just want to say emotions aren't bad. They're information. It is your body processing energy, like emotion, emotion, energy in motion. That's all emotion is. But anyways, yeah, it's usually that. It's a trigger. And sometimes this will come through projection. You don't like somebody. You think that they're stupid. You think that they're, the example I just gave, they're full of themselves, right? This is basically your shadow trying to show itself through an unconscious projection. The thing is our mind is creating our reality at all times. So if you have unaddressed stuff in your unconscious mind, it's going to be coming at you through other ways in your life, maybe through your career, through the jobs you take, through the relationships you hold, through friendships, romantic relationships especially. But nobody really applies this to sex. And that's what I do as a Jungian coach is I kind of bridged Jungian psychology with sexuality to live more authentically when it comes down to our sex lives. And I say this all the time too, being sexually liberated or sexually free or sexually authentic, it doesn't mean that you're just I don't know, naked in an orgy in the middle of the forest, just being the sexual primal being. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is for some people, being sexually authentic might be being asexual. For some people, sexually authentic might mean really leaning into kink. For some people, being sexually authentic, it might be leaning into polyamory. And for other people, monogamy is their sexually authentic. But it's all about really breaking down conditioning around sex and sexuality, which has so many more layers and so much more shame narrative wrapped around it, which is why looking in this particular area of your life is so important. And so many people usually bypass it just because, I don't know, for whatever reason. I feel like for me, it was because I didn't think anybody would really get me. So I didn't really bring this to a practitioner, to a therapist or a coach. I know for some of my clients, they're working through things that they feel shameful about, whether that be from a religious upbringing, just general shaming around their sexuality from their parents. Maybe they've gone through sexual trauma. All of these things will cast a very heavy sexual shadow that, again, the shadow is what we can't see. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's just something we can't see. And it tends to be the most unconscious area of some people's lives because there's such an extra layer of shame or perhaps trauma around this area in your life. And I did do a whole other episode about sexual trauma and sexual assault, but basically this emotion of shame around sexuality is so powerful that people won't even turn a light on in this room to even take a look. Doing regular shadow work is kind of tough because your ego gets in the way and wants to protect you and is like, no, don't go there. Doing sexual shadow work, and there can be an extra layer of defenses or complexity to really do this work, but it is the most rewarding work you can do because once you have a good relationship with your sexuality, you have a great relationship with creation, with joy, with literal power. This is our sacral chakra. It is the power force of our energy center. And not to get too woo-woo, but it's true. And sexual energy and creative energy are very closely tied. So if you don't have a good relationship with your sexuality and know what works for you, it can be a drain on your energy. And I should probably do a whole episode on that around sexuality and creativity, because I know for some people, withdrawing from sexual activity or orgasm control or things like this will actually help fuel creativity into other projects. And for other people, they need that sexual energy, right? They need the muse to fuel their art. So that for another day, but just know that all of this stuff is very connected, and having a good relationship with this part of your life and having more illumination in this part of your life will really open up so many doors that you had no idea were possible. And trust me on this, like when I started doing this work on myself, I was like, oh my God, how this was tied to me showing up authentically in other ways, how this was tied to my general feelings of like freedom and joy. And here's the thing, I've always been a pretty open person sexually, but I didn't really do it in the most conscious way. And you can listen to prior episodes where I talk about this, but I was experimental, but not necessarily conscious or checking in with my psyche or my body about what really truly felt good. So yeah, unfortunately, it took an assault in my adult years for me to kind of rewind and go back to that part of my life and go, okay, like, what's going on here? Because I think the wound, the later in life wound that was inflicted on me really opened up some of this other stuff for healing. While I won't say, oh, I'm so grateful that that assault happened, I am actually very grateful that it did prompt me into going deeper into this work, because there were so many things that I thought were just perhaps like weird or wrong with me. After doing sexual shadow work, it really illuminated how these sexual fantasies were actually connected to the deeper parts of my unconscious mind. Like, let's say, for example, someone with abandonment issues might have a fantasy about being like kidnapped and locked up in a basement or something because they are being kept there, right? It's kind of like the shadow of their abandonment is like someone just taking over their agency by force and taking ownership of them. That can be very appealing to someone that has maybe deep-rooted abandonment issues from developmental trauma, which is also why BDSM can be so healing when it's done consciously. Again, consciously, not unconsciously, meaning that the submissive is using this experience to like open themselves up to vulnerability and exploration, and the dominant has a lot of care and respect for their submissive, and that their intentions are not completely self-serving, and that they actually care about the outcome for the person that they are dominating. Anyways, this isn't a BDSM episode. We're talking about sexual shadow work. So what are some ways we can do sexual shadow work? Well, think about regular shadow work. You're looking at things that you are getting the ick over in other people, right? Let's say you judge someone because you think they're crazy or manipulative or greedy or stupid or whatever judgment you have on that person. We could do some shadow work exercises around what's actually not integrated within you and your unconscious mind that is now being projected out onto the other. Same thing happens in the sexual arena. So first thing I would do is like sit down and think about all the things that you judge other people for sexually, whether that's they're too promiscuous or they're a prude, or I'm even seeing people in like the polyamory social media spaces that you can just tell that they have like so much resentment towards monogamy. It's the taste of anger, resentment, disgust, any of this like ugh that you get towards anyone else's sexual preferences. This is like right where you start. You start here. You start with the judgments. And then you can do shadow work around this. I would suggest working with a practitioner to do it because sometimes your ego will just come in and be like, well, no, that's just everyone thinks they're that way. It's not that, it's, like you'll get that kind of block basically that could happen. Essentially, you want to sit down and you want to go, what is so bad about being that thing that I'm saying is bad? For example, you're like, this woman, she's promiscuous, she's a slut. We'll use that. Okay, well, you're going to ask yourself, what's so wrong with that? And you're really going to drill down on why it's so bad to be that way and why you are at the core afraid to be that way. And how are you overcompensating in your life to make sure that you don't appear that way? Okay. So for someone that's always has their eyes out, oh my God, everyone's so promiscuous. Oh my God, everyone's such a slut. They might be closing themselves off from, I don't know, being open with other partners because they don't want to appear promiscuous, or dating more than one person at a time when actually maybe that might be a better situation for them because they don't want to come across slutty. So this is essentially just, I'm giving real basics here of like how you do shadow work. You basically find out, why do I find that so wrong? What do I fear about becoming that person? There's usually an opposite trait there that you're portraying as part of your persona or personality that is essentially blocking you from integration, moving through the world more freely, more openly. Another thing to do, and I did take people through an exercise in my erotic shadow course, but really understanding your sexual persona. I also talked about this on the last episode around sexual masking. Understanding, first, what is your persona that you want to be perceived as sexually? Maybe that's not slutty. Maybe that's skilled. Maybe that's hot. There's so many different things that people want to be perceived as when they're in the bedroom. And then ask yourself, what are the opposite qualities of that? What am I rejecting by wanting to make sure that I appear this way? And explore that. Another one, and this is what I like to say to find like your kink codes, like how do I show up in the world and what's the opposite of that? That's usually something that you're gonna have a lot of fun doing in bed. So for example, okay, I'll use myself for example. Everyday life, I'm pretty playful, I'm pretty sweet, I'm pretty kind, but I like delving into darker stuff in the bedroom sometimes, like getting into my dominatrix energy, or like, let's think of someone who's in control of the time. They're a manager, they're running a team, they're running a company. In their shadow would actually be submission. As for people that have more submissive roles in their everyday life, they're caregivers, they're nurses, they're people generally that are out there just really doing a lot of caregiving or serving other people. Those people might have a lot more fun being dominant in bed. And there's also things to consider that are like deep desires that might come out in these like really elaborate, or what some people might think are like strange or non-standard fantasies. So also know that that is totally normal and okay too. If you're like, I have this fantasy and I think it's like super weird and I don't think anybody would get it, or I think it's shameful or whatever, you really want to think about what's the core emotion or thing going on. Take your libido out of it and just like put your wisdom mind on it and be like, what is happening in this scene or this fantasy that I find really sexually appealing? What are the primary feelings or emotions that are happening here? For example, that when I gave like, oh, like someone that had a fantasy about being locked in a cage in a basement. Okay. Sounds dark, but on the deeper level, it's the feeling of someone having complete control of you, essentially caregiving for you. Like they're probably feeding you in the basement so they can keep you down there for a long time, right? There's like other layers to this. I knew someone that was really into like massage therapy porn, like someone's giving a massage and then it turns into the sexual interaction. Like the deeper desire there was like having somebody that was just very attentive to their body. Also too, if you've experienced a sexual assault, there's another layer of this. And also if you feel like, hey, I have some fantasies that I think are related to that, totally don't feel, and I said this before, but don't feel shame over that. That is usually the way that your psyche and your nervous system will essentially replay something that was quote unquote traumatic in order for you to kind of complete the cycle in your nervous system and heal. So all I'm going to say is like, enjoy it and don't feel shame around it. And as long as you're not harming anybody and you're not in harm's way and you are playing safely and consensually, then by all means, play in this way and don't feel weird about it. Basically, just understand that any like fantasies you have generally have some other emotional component to it that wants to be seen. Also, when you're doing this work, you really want to double click on all the belief systems and basically like all the different roots of where you got your beliefs about sex and sexuality, whether it be through your family, from the media. I have a free guide, I'll link it in the notes, that you can just do at least this preliminary work around your belief system, around your social groups, your family, media, etc. Because I think just sitting down and really taking the time and going, what have I been told about sex? What are some memories that I have from like my early life about what it means to be sexual, what it means to be a sexual woman, what it means to be a sexual man, what it means to be queer. This is all very important stuff. Even if you say like, oh, well, I'm a woman, like also think about what are the sexual narratives for men. Or you're like, I'm straight. Also think about what are the sexual narratives for queer people, because it really does cross-pollinate to all of us while we're all out there connecting with each other sexually. So understanding the conditioning as a whole is also important too. But yes, if you want to get started on this work, I've created a mini program. It's essentially a course, a one-on-one session with me, and a visualization that you can do at home to tap deeper into your unconscious mind, to get to some of the roots of the sexual shame and be able to integrate some more sexual authenticity. The live course is happening on October 10th, but you get to use your one-on-one session right away and you get the download to the visualization right away. And trust me, I know it can be weird to start this work and it's uncomfortable. And the fact that you're even here listening to this podcast, that you're engaging with it, like, is a step forward in the right direction. So I want to honor you for the moves you have already made towards becoming more of your authentic, true sexual self. And again, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next time.